Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Sunday morning roundtable discussion with our wonderful subject of God. So glad you could join us today. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, in the United States of America. And we welcome you all. We'll start with our morning prayer.
I'm reading from page 220 of Miscellany and 220 of Divinity Course and General Collectania. Each day I pray for the pacification of all national difficulties, for the brotherhood of man, for the end of idolatry and infidelity, and for the growth and establishment of Christian religion, Christ, Christianity. I also have faith that my prayer availeth, and that he who is overturning will overturn until he whose right it is shall reign. Each day I pray, God bless my enemies, make them thy friends, give them to know the joy and the peace of love. The liberty of the sons of God is for each one to desire God, and for each one to desire for his mortal neighbor just what he desires for himself. Mary Baker Eddy.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right, the watching point.
Watch number 496. Watch that you realize that you are a terror to error, that your consciousness of God is so effective and powerful, and you are the custodian of such vast power that the moment you apply it, it does things. It dissipates error and leaves the infinite good, filling all space. The time must come when we recognize, the time must come when we recognize ourselves as aggressors rather than merely defenders of the faith. There is a temptation to feel that there exists a great lie claiming to be power, and that we must protect ourselves against it. Like the knights of old, we must ride forth with shield and sword to defend ourselves against error, so that we may destroy it. Yet this conception does not fit Mrs. Eddy's statement that she used to do her work with the realization that God is all. The answer is that this phase of our experience is a necessary but passing one. We must recognize ourselves as terrors to error until we can rise to the realization that there is no error, since God is all.
Thank you. Very important. Okay, comments on that?
Well, I can't believe it, but in my past experience, God is all was never, not that I didn't read it, but it was never stressed like it is here. And it's just wonderful. 3 little words, but boy, it just changed my whole life. And I'm just so grateful that it is stressed here. And this is why, obviously, God led me here. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
And where are we to be aggressors?
That which claims another power presence apart from God.
Yeah, and where does it take place?
At the door of our own thinking.
Thank you.
Our own thinking.
Yeah, we're to be aggressors in our own consciousness. It doesn't mean you go up to strangers in the street and preach at them aggressively, or even in your own family. No, this is this is in our own consciousness. We need to be aggressive with the love that God is. And when we express love to others, we express it without temerity, without hesitation.
Jeremy?
Yeah, when I first read this, I was kind of grateful for this because it's a clear indication that we are not to be passive in our taking in this science and using it daily. So we gotta do everything we can.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Also,
No, go ahead.
also, I think that if we really in reverence of God's allness, then we also know that He does have the authority. And this authority is given us. Saying, man is a reflection of God, then we have this same authority that is not our authority, but the authority of God to overcome the error confronting us. And I think from that, I think of it that way. It really then cuts out the doubting and the fears and wavering that may come with it.
Thank you. Yes, we're custodians of such vast power. And I love Carpenter because he reiterates this in his books, the all power of God, and that it is God, not we ourselves. And yes, scientists, you have to be careful with this. Mrs. Eddy cautions you, as Gary was talking about, you don't go around saying there's no evil and God is all until you've proven it. Maybe if you've had some wonderful proof of it, maybe then you can explain that point. But otherwise, you'll just rankle people. They won't understand it. And you make sure you understand it, that you prove it and you understand it. And sometimes you'll hear scientists just saying, oh, air is nothing, God is all. But it's said very flippantly, yeah, without an understanding, depth to it. And that is seriously wrong. So we prove
But
it, the truth.
on the other hand, right, isn't it important to be knowing that in your own consciousness in a very firm way all day long, that air is nothing, and not that you're saying it out loud, but that you're seeing it and recognizing it all day, that God is all.
Yes, that is the point of the point.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
the point. Most definitely, that's yeah. I'm just talking about teaching it, as Gary was too. You have to be careful, or just simply saying it when you don't really believe it. You've got to really get to a point where you believe it, and also that thought about being a terror to error, that comes first. And you have to do that in your own thought when error confronts you, to kick it out, be strong with it. And then you get progressing to the point where you know that God is all and that there is really no error to kick out because of that.
Yes.
I remember
can you have all and then have something else. So
you don't put up the sword until you've used it.
Yes, that's most important. Put up thy sword in miscellaneous writings. So yeah, it has to be done in a consecutive order, so to speak, and you've got to feel it in your heart, and then you'll bring it forth. I remember when Mrs. Evans first taught this, she was teaching the 91st Psalm, and which is all about protection, right? And then she said, well, really, there's nothing to protect yourself from because God is all. And it was like, wow, I never thought of that. That's true. So we think we're protecting ourselves from something, but honestly, God is all. So, and whatever comes to you is only for a big blessing. Go ahead.
I think also what's helpful, if God is all and I'm knowing it all the time, like somebody just said, then it nullifies any error. It really renders it nothingness. So that thinking also helps.
Yes. Most
the
wonderful thing is, like, in spite of these appearances that come to us, I mean, it's so wonderful to know when you really are convicted that in spite of what you seem to be seeing here, this is not what God is seeing, and so it simply is not real. Sounds crazy, but that's true.
And it's true because you can prove it. Otherwise, it would be not true. It's provable.
Yeah, right.
It's provable. And this is why Mrs. Eddy, the first watch of the morning from 9 to 10, was to establish the omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience of God, the allness of God, which rules out fear. Because fear is always the bugaboo. And if you get yourself into this state of consciousness first thing in the morning, you'll find the error won't even be around. You've annihilated it. It won't even be in your experience. Or if it is, your thought is so strong, you will vanquish it immediately. So remember that, and remember how important these watches are to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. Okay, good watching. Thank you. All right. Did someone want to speak?
Yeah, I wanted to say something. This watch just really was very helpful a lot of times because it says, and you are the custodian of such vast power that the moment you apply it, it does things. It dissipates the error and leaves the infinite good. But it was so encouraging about actually applying it, not just thinking about it, but applying it. And as soon as you do, things start happening. And that was very encouraging for me.
Yes. And you can prove this for yourself day by day. Two things came to my attention this week I'd like to bring out before we go on. One was something that has happened in Tennessee. Tennessee State Senator Mark Pody and Representative Monty Fritz sent a letter to the pastors of their state recently asking that they join state leaders in a 30-day season of prayer and intermittent fasting for the month of July as a means of humbling ourselves to receive God's grace and mercy and blessing in Tennessee and in our nation. That was a quote. House Joint Resolution 803 passed with an overwhelming 27-1 vote in the Senate and 82-6 vote in the House. That's in the state of Tennessee, and was signed into law by Governor Lee on April 16, 2024. Pody and Fritz continued, this document embodies a bipartisan recognition that the issues we are facing cannot be effectively addressed without the intervention and favor of our Lord. We are respectfully inviting you to join with us in leading the people of God across Tennessee into a time of humbling ourselves, praying, seeking God's face, and repentance during July. Let us model for those who are not called by his name a better way to bring about the positive changes we so desperately need. And it says, how do we do this? And it has, I don't know, like a couple pages of lists of things. Whereas our state and nation suffer from violence committed upon our citizens by our citizens. Whereas violent crime in our schools are unacceptable. It goes on of what has gone on in our states, our nations, because we have failed to bring God into our lives and into our government.
And into our schools.
And into our schools. And then, so that was very important that that's going on. If it happens in Tennessee, maybe it will happen in some other states, acknowledging that. And then also, Tom from New York, Louisiana has become the first state to require that the Ten Commandments be displayed in every public school classroom. The legislation that Governor Jeff Landry signed into law on Wednesday requires a poster-sized display of the Ten Commandments in large, easily readable font in all public classrooms, from kindergarten to state-funded universities. If you want to respect the rule of law, you've got to start from the original lawgiver, which was Moses, who got the commandments from God, the governor said. So that's great news. They're bringing it back.
Yeah.
Louisiana.
Louisiana.
Yeah, and Tom sent that to me. And now it's on Noteworthy News.
The article goes on to say that there are other states that are considering similar legislation, but they haven't passed it yet. One of the reasons they haven't passed it yet is because they are afraid of the litigation by devil worshippers who are going to oppose it big time. So get ready for a fight.
But the dominoes are falling.
Yeah. People are pushing back because never was it intended that God be taken out of our schools. That was not the intention of what was written by our founding fathers. Never. That was a misinterpretation. And there's going to be a pushing back because, as this wonderful statement that Florence brought to my attention, which is in Miscellany, page 183, John Robinson wrote in 1620 to our Pilgrim Fathers, "When Christ reigns, and not till then, will the world have rest." Amen. Thank you, Florence. And we're going to use that as yes. And this is so important because there's all this unrest. There's only one reason for it. We need Christ to reign in our lives, in our schools, everywhere. That is the only answer. And John Robinson, he was the pastor of the Pilgrims. And when it came time for the Pilgrims to take off for the New World and leave Holland, they had two ships originally, the Mayflower and the Speedwell. And the Speedwell, it broke down or something. It wasn't serviceable.
Yeah.
So John Robinson had to stay behind with a group of pilgrims that weren't able to go to the New World, as we were called, as America was called. And he's the one who quotes this, and he's the one who said this, I should say. And he's the one the Pilgrims had utmost respect for. He was a wonderful Christian pastor. So anyway, that's good news.
I'd like to add something to what you said about Louisiana. A new directive from Oklahoma's top education official requires all public schools to teach the Bible and the Ten Commandments. And this came after Louisiana mandated the display of the Ten Commandments. So people are starting to catch on to this.
Good. Because, the Supreme Court that ruled against the Bible in the school,
They got it all wrong.
And that was in the 60s. And even now we understand that the Supreme Court was never meant to be the final authority on things. It was not. There's been so misinterpretation of so many things in our original documents. And we are studying this all carefully. And I know that you all send me a lot of things to read. But believe me, I'm doing my own research and my own study, as you all should. And sometimes I do not have the time to read or listen to these long things. I'm coming to my own conclusions through my own very earnest study, and not superficial, but very deep study. So,
and God shows you what's true.
And God will tell you what's true. It'll be in your heart, and you will know when the wolf is in sheep's clothing. Mm-hmm. So you'll know.
It's interesting to me, though, that there are countries that have the Bible as part of their curriculum, the study of religion. So
thank you.
It's beyond that. I feel is the example of parents, guardians, whoever, also that generation from generation copy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and that's how it was in the United States until recently. And that's why the United States prospered.
And the only reason.
And it's only been recently in the history of the United States that the Bible is not part of the curriculum.
Yeah,
I think there's also some confusion that religion, that this is about religion, and it really doesn't have anything to do with religion. It's just right. It's just the laws of God that don't have. It's not political. It's not necessary. not religion. Well, actually, the definition of religion means to bind back, but and that's what the fight against it is. You just want your religion, but it's not about religion. It's about law and God's laws, and everybody has to obey. Sorry, it doesn't really matter what your political views are. It's the law of God.
That's true. The laws of the universe, and that's what Christian Science is. And absolutely. And thank you too, Janet, for bringing that out. That's very encouraging. Jeremy?
Oh, I was just going to say that, it's only been recently, like Gary said, that the Bible's been taken out. But it's also only been recently that parents have pretty much outsourced education. The home needs to take care of the kids, needs to teach the kids.
Yeah.
Teach them right.
Someone did send me something about my daughter-in-law who was from Russia. Anyway, it was about Justin Bieber and how he said, he'd reach rock bottom and the only place he had to turn to was Christ Jesus. But he also said that what had turned him off to Christianity was so many of the bad examples. Please don't be a bad example. My God, please don't do that. As has been said, your life might be the only sermon anyone ever hears. You're going to be a bad example and not live what you preach. You are turning people off left, right, and sideways. So finally, Justin Bieber found a good example, and now he's embracing the real sense of it. It was a beautiful article, and he is, most of you know he's some kind of a rock star, I guess. But anyway, he has influence over a lot of our youth, and so very good, very good. And he will be a great influence and can explain it in ways that people will understand and accept.
And
okay. And live it. Okay, the golden text.
Isaiah, I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not known me.
Thank you. Now, Carrie had sent me some articles about acknowledging God. God is working in our lives all the time. Sometimes the reason we say, I don't feel close to God, I don't know God, well, you haven't acknowledged his presence. You haven't been grateful for whatever good has been given to you. And that is why, and I'll go back to it again from Mrs. Eddy, I tell you the truth when I say there's only one source of all good, God. The conscious recognition and acceptance of this fact acknowledged by every activity of the mind, not 2 or 3 times a day, but every few moments all day long, no matter what the outer self is doing, and this maintained will enable anyone to express his perfect freedom and dominion over all things human. Do you do that? Are you acknowledging God? And what is acknowledging God? Acknowledging good with a capital G, because that's what God is. Mrs. Eddy's definition of God, part of it is good in science and health. And then the great I am, the all-knowing, all-seeing, all-acting, all-wise, all-loving, and eternal. Principle, mind, soul, spirit, life, truth, love, intelligence. Substance. Anyway, most of you know that one, and you should work with it every day, applying it to yourself and to our nation and our world. What all those qualities mean, as I call it, bring it home, bring it to yourself. But this acknowledgement of good. So this article says, when a beginner in the study of Christian Science tries to apply what he has learned of God to any given situation and finds the outcome harmonious, he will sometimes remark, I cannot say if it was a demonstration or not. It might have been a chance or a coincidence, which would have happened anyway. That happens. But does the student of mathematics doubt that the correct solution of a problem is a demonstration of laws and rules of numbers? Do you say 2 + 2 = 4? Oh, well, maybe that's just a coincidence. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's a law operating. and it must be acknowledged. To acknowledge or recognize the basic rules of fundamentals of mathematics is to eliminate any element of chance, favor, or luck, so called, from the correct solution of any mathematical problem. It wasn't just luck that your problem worked out. To declare that the solution was a chance simply implies ignorance of the basic rule, which must have been applied, albeit unwittingly, for the result to be a correct one. And then, it goes on that you can, in your past, maybe see how God had been working in your past. While at the time you might not have acknowledged or realized it was God, but it was God. It was the rules and laws of the universe operating. Now, the more you acknowledge that, the more you acknowledge God's presence and power with you, Emmanuel, God with us, which is what I love to say a lot, and that's why, the more you will bring it into your life, and the closer you will feel to God, and then the realization that you are in the kingdom of heaven when you're obeying Him. The lesson makes it very clear He requires our absolute obedience. No reservation for any lesser loyalty. Thank you. Yes. Absolute obedience.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know over the years I've really worked to get rid of ever using the words luck or chance or anything like that, and that has really helped me a lot.
Thank you.
Because whenever you run into a situation where before you would have said chance or whatever, you are forced to figure out what the right word is.
Thank you. And this is why the secular world, because it's chance, it's luck, so they're going to these tarot card readers and this other things, because they haven't learned about God and giving God the credit, the glory. For God is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Kingdom, the only kingdom, not all these other crazy kingdoms.
Omnipresent. Everywhere. His kingdom. There is no other kingdom.
And it has come. It is
and as you pointed recently, Mary, expectancy along with that acknowledgement is so important. To expect that the good is there, to expect an answer when you reach out to God.
Absolutely, because, some of us, as I said, I didn't expect healing. You need to expect it.
No, you're so right, because when you get to that point, the expectancy and the acknowledgement are really the one and the same, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why Jesus thanked God before
and after.
Thanksgiving and recognition, like Bicknell Young says in finance.
No, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so we do learn what God is, good, and then all those synonyms, everything that's good, and then we must acknowledge His presence, seeing Him everywhere in our daily life. How many times has He blessed you? That is, as I've said, impresses me about the chosen. They'll take a bite of an apple and they thank God for the fruit of the land, and they wake up in the morning, they thank God for the good night, and they thank God for everything. They're always thanking God. It's a great habit, a good habit. So, acknowledging Him.
I looked up the word girded from the Golden Text, and it's beautiful because it says to prepare for action, to encircle, and then it goes on to provide, surround, equip.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you very much. Because it's in this lesson about being girded. So read it again.
Oh, sure.
Now that you lost it.
No, I didn't lose it. It's to equip and to surround, provide, to prepare for action, to encircle. But it's very beautiful that he says, yeah, I've girded thee, even though thou dost not know. And that's the whole thing that we read in this watch. He's given you the power.
Whether we acknowledge it or
exactly.
not.
Passive.
Passive, embrace, encircle, encompass, girdle, surround.
Yes.
But I love the prepare for action part.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, and these laws are operating, yes, whether you acknowledge them or not, they're operating. And if you're doing them, even though maybe you don't realize it's God, you will be blessed. You don't necessarily have to know its source, but if you're obedient to it and following it, a lot of people just have a good sense of what's right. Most people do. Your conscience. You'll be blessed by following the universe. But it's so much better when you acknowledge and see where it's coming from, because that makes it real and concrete and not this, well, I'm not sure about it. It's really real.
Well, that's where you can start learning to trust it, too.
Yes, yes. And that's where your faith comes in. All these, one thing follows the next. Now, this was a really interesting article by William D. McCracken, sent to us from Carrie. And it starts off, again, acknowledgement. The mental acknowledgement that God is an ever-present living power, flooding the universe with spiritual light, cleansing the blackness of night from off the waters of truth, is like the anchor of love which holds by an unbreakable chain the rights of the righteous man. And then it goes on, and I never could really understand. I wasn't sure I understood about the rivers, the rivers. And Mrs. Eddy defines them. William McCracken says, when the world is covered by the fierce waves of error, humanity, while it struggles, waits for the waters to subside. At such times, thought turns constantly to measures for the draining off of the inundating waters, in order that all life may not vanish from the face of the earth. Now, we are told in the scripture that a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. Then why not let the waters of this river of Eden drive away the floods of error when they invade human consciousness, and let them water the soil of that consciousness with truth? So then it talks about Mrs. Eddy and her 4 rivers that she mentions in the glossary. The first one is Pison, defined on page 593 of our textbook as the love of the good and beautiful and their immortality. Here is mentioned that a trait of character which instinctively reaches out for truth, a fundamental quality which can be used as a channel for replenishing the earth as the waters of error subside. The great river of glory flowing through the consciousness of the spiritual man has on its surface and in its depth the love of the good and the beautiful. I mean, that is so beautiful. It makes perfect sense. That's kind of the start of getting the flow of the rivers, that it's going to cleanse the world of the error. And then the river Gihon, page 587 of Science and Health. Now, this is interesting. The rights of woman acknowledged morally, civilly, and socially. Why do you think that's important?
Well, in her time, they weren't.
In her time, they were not. And they needed to be in order for science and health and Christian Science to come forth.
And one of the things that we need as a world to be healed of is male chauvinism, because that is nothing but a mortal belief.
And it can be very, very prevalent.
And very harmful.
Yeah. I mean, it's taken a long struggle in our country, and it's still, I still hear stories of it.
And it's still the law in many Middle Eastern countries and others around the world.
Yes, it is.
Where there is no enlightenment.
I even heard a Christian person. Oh, go ahead.
No, somebody has their computer on.
No, that was just Lenny coming on.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Lenny?
No, I was going to say, I even heard a couple of so-called Christian people saying that they didn't believe women could be pastors or, leaders of a church. And I was flabbergasted by that, because I didn't realize that was still prevalent in any of the Christian religions. But that would certainly try to undermine Mrs. Eddy's position as well.
It sure would. And that's why a lot of people won't even touch Christian Science. But this is the bad example of Christians, okay? Thanks a lot. You know, they say
call yourself a Christian, but you don't even acknowledge something fundamental like that. Come on.
But they do think it's Bible based, and as well as other things that are so contrary to the Sermon on the Mount and what we're taught. That's why Christ's Christianity is so important. Because our youth will listen to something like that and say, "Heck, I'm not going to be part of that. No thanks." And they're rightfully so. Rightfully so. Okay, so the next river is Hiddekel, defined on page 588. And that one is defined as divine science understood and acknowledged. Now there again, that will help cleanse the world, right? 4 rivers. And then the final river, the 4th river, is Euphrates, divine science encompassing the universe and man, defined in part on page 585. The circle is complete, and the truth has reached all parts of God's creation. The false sea has disappeared, and man no longer waits for the waters of error to subside. For the real sea of harmony is that into which the net is cast and found to be filled with a multitude of fish, and which contains the fish in whose mouth is a piece of money, which pays the tax, the sea of spiritual substance. And then resounds the psalmist's joyous declaration: the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and the world and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. So I thought that was really helpful. That to me is one of the best explanations I know of the rivers mentioned in Science and Health.
And I think it's timely that the net is cast, and that is why we are using the internet to spread the truth around the world, right?
That's its purpose.
That is the whole purpose of the internet.
And it's flooding the world and cleansing the world of all these false beliefs. These truths are just going out, all these wonderful articles by the early workers. Of course, Mrs. Eddy's works, written form, audio form, just going out, healing, blessing, purifying. It's tremendous. The Word of God, but acknowledging Him, so important. All right, Nancy, do you want to tell me what you sent us?
Yes. I love what follows every one of our watches. Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And I looked up a few things from Spurgeon. This is the great doctrine that we learn both from the Old and the New Testament. There is one Lord. May we be kept always from all idolatry, from all worship of anything else except the living God. The sacred unity of the divine Trinity may we hold fast evermore. And in one of his sermons, he writes, right reflection on the law and on this great commandment should undo us. But embedded in this jewel is the glimmer of hope. The Lord our God, he is our God. He is the Lord, and the Lord is our God. He preserves thee. Thy table is spread, and he spread it for thee. The air that thou dost breathe is a gift of his charity. The clothes that thou hast on thy back are gifts of his love. Thy life depends on him. Thy life is absolutely dependent upon him. And Matthew Henry, Jehovah our God is the only living and true God. He only is God, and he is but one God. Let us not desire to have any other. It is better to have one fountain than 1,000 cisterns, one all-sufficient God than 1,000 insufficient friends. This is the first great commandment of God's law, that we love him, and that we do all parts of our duty to him from a principle of love. My son, give me thine heart. We are to love God with all our heart and soul and might. That is, with an entire love, for he is one. Our hearts must be united in his love. Oh, that this love of God may be shed abroad in our hearts.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Our one God, and that was Abraham, right, who taught us about him at the very beginning. And we shall have no other gods before him. I didn't even understand that for a long, long time, because to have another God, to serve other gods. You know, Joshua talks about, not in this house, we're only serving God. And other gods are all kinds of things, your business, your home, your family, or wealth, greed, letting resentment come over you. All these things are other gods. They're not the one God, and they get us into trouble. The one God is good, and he requires our absolute obedience, as said in Science and Health this week that I love so much. Divine mind rightly demands man's entire obedience, affection, and strength. Look those words up. Obedience, affection, strength. No reservation is made for any lesser loyalty. And then, obedience to truth gives man power and strength. Submission to error superinduces loss of power. Highly important statement. And I know myself, if I'm ever feeling weak, discouraged, it's because I haven't been obeying God. Simple. I've been letting all these thoughts come in, fearful, negative thoughts. Didn't just happen one morning. I woke up not feeling great. I was doing this for a while. These little things that creep in here, there, everywhere. Got to catch it. Stand porter at the door of thought. Don't allow it, because you will feel weak until you do what you should. But in weakness, you are strong, right? Because then that forces you to throw your whole self onto the bosom of God. And when you do that, you have power and strength, not your own, but of God, which is the only power there is. So thank you for that, Nancy. And now Chardell.
All right. I was working with faith and faithfulness this week. And it's faithfulness. It's not blind faith that we need. And then I looked on our website and I found Divine Help by Duncan Sinclair from 1922. I'll just read a little bit of it. As soon as the truth began to dawn upon mankind that there is but one God, there sprang up in the hearts of men a faith which could be relied upon in times of trial. Faintly perceived at first, this truth gradually developed until God came to be known not only as supreme over all, but as the one, I have to turn the page, altogether lovely, altogether good. Isaiah, speaking with the authority of marvelous insight into the goodness of truth, could say, behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened, it cannot that it cannot save, neither his ear heavy, that it cannot hear. Thus declaring that God hears his children's cry, be it ever so feeble, and can save at all times, because his hand is unlimited in power.
Thank you. That's it. So, all power. Quiet yourself with the thought that God is all power. He provides your health. He protects you. He provides your health and abundance of anything else you need. It's a paraphrase from that article, Evening Prayer by Mrs. Eddy. But quiet yourself with the thought he's all power. And he will take care of you in times of need and in all times. But very important to acknowledge him in all times, not just when the going gets rough, so to speak.
Parts of 1828 Webster's definition of obedience. I just looked it up when you said that. The performance of what is required and the abstaining of what is prohibited.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So,
yeah. Yes. And you know, it's only error that would tell you or anyone that you don't want to do this. Or, I mean, I don't understand who would object to the 10 Commandments. I mean, what's in there that's objectionable?
The convenient lie, the white lie, and I was brought up with, it's okay to a little white lie here every so often, but stay away from the real lies. But they're all lies.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right.
Pharisees are probably very good at telling just enough that favored their cause.
That's it. That's it. So obeying his rules, listening, total obedience gives us power and strength. And so that's our daily task every day, to do this, to watch our thoughts so that we do it and don't sneak out of the kingdom somehow by listening to other thoughts. And then we have in the lesson the beautiful story of Joshua. And I've always loved Joshua. That was a hard act to follow, Moses. And that first Joshua, all about fear not, I command thee, all of these wonderful promises of God, not to be afraid. And he wasn't. He did wonderful things, as the lesson says. And because of him, because they served the Lord in sincerity and in truth, which we need to do. We can't be hypocritical, say one thing and do something else. Serve him in sincerity and truth. Then all the days of the elders and those that overlived Joshua and which had known all the works of the Lord that he had done for Israel, all of that good was passed down. That's why we need to pass this down to our next generation. Tell them the truth. Tell them what they need to hear, because they're getting false stories now. Tell them the truth. Know what is the truth yourself, so you can't be swayed. And then, for this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. And this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he heareth us. Anything according to his will. So line it up to his will. If you're not sure, say, thy will be done, Father, only thy will. And he hears it. Somewhere Mrs. Eddy says that she was brought to tears at times, because really anything she asked God to do, he did. Whatever. But that's because her life was in total obedience according to his will. And she knew that, accepted that, and then she brought it forth in her life.
She didn't ask amiss.
She did not ask amiss. No, she did not. So we have a wonderful God that should be real to every one of us. And as you acknowledge his presence and power day by day and thank him for it, he will become real. Then we're going to end now on a beautiful article called Confidence. I think Jacob sent this to me years ago. It's an excerpt about confidence in God.
Yes, this is an article by Martha Harris Bogue, and it's in the March 1903 journal. And she writes, confidence is a quality of mind, a quality of God. Since confidence is God-given, the statement, I lack confidence, is false. The person who is declaring the lack of confidence to succeed is very confident of his ability to fail. Jesus said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do of his good pleasure. We are to work out our salvation, deliverance from the belief of power in evil, with fear and with trembling. Not wait until we get out of fear and the trembling has stopped before we attempt to overcome. Is it his pleasure, his will, that we should fail in that which he has bidden us to do? resist the devil? Is it his will that we should make mistakes? Of course not. We are to take up the cross daily, take up whatever is opposed to God that crosses our path, not as something, but as nothing, and put it out of the way. Fear is faith in evil. Courage is faith in God. Doubt is trust in evil. Confidence rightly directed is trust in God, good. When we are afraid, we can ask ourselves, where is my faith? What am I trusting in? Good or evil? Spirit or matter? If we fail, it is because our faith is in the wrong thing. When a very young student, I was called to see a woman who had not stood on her feet or sat in a chair for over 10 years. Medical science had entirely failed. My teacher had given my name to the invalid's family, and I felt that obedience demanded that I should go. I surely went with fear and trembling. All the way I studied science and health, and all the time personal sense argued that someone else should have been sent, that if I should fail, the cause of Christian Science would suffer, until I almost wished I could take the train back and send an older practitioner. Then the consciousness came that those in need had not sent for me, they had sent for Christian Science. I saw that all that was trembling and fearing had no part in it, could neither hinder nor help. That revealed truth was to do the work, and it was omnipotent. That I did have confidence in God, and these words came, quote, have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. For the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. End quote. And that's from Joshua 1, verse 9. My confidence in God's ability, in the power of the Word, began at once to take the place of confidence in my own ability to fail. I left self-reliance behind, and with God reliance went to the woman. I was able to remain only about 4 hours, but before I left the patient, she walked across the room and sat in a chair. The next morning she was dressed and went to her breakfast with the family. She has been a well woman ever since. In this I learned that I must never let fear and trembling keep me from taking the step before me. We do not need confidence in our own ability, but we do need confidence in God's ability and willingness to work in us, to give us dominion over all the earth. And we must have the willingness to take the steps and prove to ourselves and others that God is omnipotent.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.